Almost everyone asking the rent versus buy question in Canada right now is asking it wrong. The question they're asking is renting just throwing money away? The question they should be asking is, what does owning actually cost per month, and how does that compare to what I'd pay to rent? The throwing money away framing has cost Canadians an enormous amount of money. It pushes people into buying when the math says renting is the smarter choice. It makes renters feel financially behind when they might actually be ahead. Today we run the real numbers and let those settle the argument. I'm not going to tell you whether you should rent or buy. That depends on your life, your timeline, your career, your city, your family situation. What I am going to show you is the framework to run the math for your situation, and then the actual numbers for 6 Canadian cities right now. This is not financial advice and just math. Let's start with the myth. Renting is not throwing money away. Every month you rent, you are purchasing housing, a roof, heat, maintenance handled by someone else, the flexibility to leave in 60 days. You are paying for a real service. The question is whether the service is priced competitively against the alternative. Now here is the part most people miss about buying. Your mortgage payment is not the cost of owning a home, it is one component of the cost. The real monthly cost of ownership includes 4 things: mortgage interest, property tax, maintenance, and the opportunity cost of your down payment. Mortgage interest is the portion of your payment that goes to the bank, not to your equity. On a $500,000 mortgage at 4%, roughly $16,000 of your first year of payments is interest. That money does not come back to you. It is gone, just like rent. Property tax on a typical Canadian home runs between $4,000 and $8,000 per year depending on the city. That is between $330 and $660 per month. It does not build equity, it is gone. Maintenance, roofs, furnaces, appliances, plumbing, electrical, fencing, driveways. The standard estimate used by financial planners is 1% of the home's value per year. On a $700,000 home, that is $7,000 a year, $580 per month on average. Some years nothing, some years everything at once. The opportunity cost of your down payment, this is the one almost nobody counts. If you put $140,000 down on a home, that money is no longer invested. At a conservative 6% annual return, that is $8,400 per year, $700 per month, in foregone investment growth. That cost is real even though it never shows up on a bill. Add these up and you have what economists call the unrecoverable cost of home ownership, the money you spend that builds no equity. Interest, property tax, maintenance, and opportunity cost. This is not an argument against buying. It is the accurate cost baseline that makes the comparison honest. There is a shorthand rule that captures this well. It is called the 5% rule. Take the purchase price of a home, multiply by 5%. That is the approximate annual unrecoverable cost of owning that home. Divide by 12 to get the monthly figure. If you can rent an equivalent home for less than that monthly figure, renting is the financially superior choice in the short run. Let's run it. A $700,000 home. 5% of $700,000 is $35,000 per year. Divided by 12, just under $3,000 per month. If you can rent an equivalent home in the same neighborhood for less than $3,000 a month, the math favors renting. If rent is higher, the math shifts toward buying. Now let's look at what this means in 6 Canadian cities with real 2026 benchmark prices and real rental market data. Toronto. The GTA benchmark sits around $942,000. 5% rule, $47,000 per year, roughly $3,900 per month in unrecoverable costs. A one-bedroom apartment in Toronto rents for approximately $2,200 to $2,400 per month. A comparable two-bedroom rental runs $2,700 to $3,000. The math strongly favors renting in Toronto at current prices, unless you are locking in a long horizon. Vancouver. Benchmark home price over $1,100,000. 5% rule, $55,000 per year, $4,580 per month unrecoverable. A comparable rental in Vancouver runs $2,400 to $2,800 per month. The gap between owning costs and renting costs is massive. Renting wins on pure math by a wide margin. Calgary. Benchmark around $628,000. 5%, $31,400 per year, $2,600 per month. A comparable rental in Calgary runs $1,700 to $2,000 per month. Renting still wins, but the gap is narrower. If you plan to stay 5 or more years, the math is much closer. Ottawa, benchmark around $618,000. 5%, $30,900 per year, $2,575 per month. Comparable rentals run $1,800 to $2,200 per month. Renting is cheaper in the short run, but the gap is smaller than Toronto or Vancouver. Montreal, benchmark around $657,000. 5%, $32,850 per year, $2,740 per month. Montreal rents are among the lowest of major Canadian cities, $1,500 to $2,000 per month for comparable units. Renting wins on pure math, but the gap is closing as Montreal prices rise faster than rents. Edmonton, benchmark around $455,000, 5%, $22,750 per year, $1,900 per month unrecoverable. Comparable rentals in Edmonton run $1,400 to $1,700 per month. This is the narrowest gap of any major Canadian city. Edmonton is where the rent versus buy math is most competitive for buyers. A quick note on what these numbers don't include. They don't include principal repayment, the portion of each mortgage payment that goes toward equity. They don't include potential home price appreciation. These are the arguments for buying, and they are real. The 5% calculation isolates only the costs, the money that leaves your household either way. The principal repayment and appreciation arguments deserve a direct response. Yes, you build equity as you pay down the mortgage, but equity is illiquid. You can't spend it without selling or borrowing. And yes, Canadian home prices have generally appreciated over time, but appreciation is not guaranteed, is not uniform across cities, and does not benefit you until you realize it. There is also a transaction cost reality that rarely gets discussed honestly. When you sell a home, you typically pay a realtor commission of around 5% of the sale price. On a $700,000 home, that is $35,000 leaving the table before you see a dollar. Land transfer taxes on purchase add another layer depending on the province. These costs mean you need to hold the property long enough for appreciation to absorb them. This leads to the concept of the break-even horizon. How long you need to own a home before the total cost of buying is less than the total cost of renting over the same period. In a market like Toronto or Vancouver with high prices relative to rents, the break-even horizon can be 10 to 15 years. In Edmonton or Winnipeg, it might be 3 to 5 years. The longer you plan to stay, the stronger the case for buying. Here is a simple decision framework. 3 questions. First, how long do you plan to stay? If the answer is under 3 years in most Canadian cities, renting is almost certainly cheaper when you account for transaction costs on both sides. If the answer is over 7 to 10 years, the math shifts meaningfully toward buying. Second question, what is the price-to-rent ratio in your specific neighborhood? Take the purchase price of a home you'd consider buying. Divide by the annual rent you'd pay for an equivalent property. A ratio under 15 strongly favors buying. A ratio over 25 strongly favors renting. Most major Canadian markets are currently sitting between 20 and 35, which means renting is the math-first answer in most of them. Third question, what would you do with the down payment if you didn't buy? If the answer is spend it, buying has a forced savings advantage that is real and worth factoring in. If the answer is invest it in a diversified portfolio, the opportunity cost is significant and the rent versus buy gap narrows or disappears. Your answer to this question changes the math more than most people realize. Now for the honest non-financial case for buying. Stability, the ability to renovate and make a space yours. The psychological peace of not being subject to a landlord's decisions. Schools, community, roots. These are not trivial. They are real and legitimate reasons to buy even when the 5-year math slightly favors renting. The point is to make the decision with eyes open, not because of a myth. And the honest non-financial case for renting. Flexibility to move for a better job. No repair bills arriving at the worst possible time. Lower housing costs in the short run that can be redirected into investments or experiences. Freedom from a 30-year financial commitment at 28. These are also real and legitimate. Neither choice is inherently superior. Here is the summary of what the math actually says in Canada in 2026. In Toronto and Vancouver, renting is the mathematically cheaper choice at almost any reasonable time horizon under 10 years. In Calgary, Ottawa, and Montreal, the gap is smaller. Buyers with a 5+ year horizon are in closer range. In Edmonton and Winnipeg, the math is most favorable for buyers, and the break-even horizon is shortest. The throwing money away framing is not just wrong, it is expensive. It pressures people into buying in markets where the math doesn't support it, at price points that stretch their budget, on timelines too short to break even on transaction costs. The people who use this framing are almost always people who already own homes and bought them years ago when the numbers were different. Run your own numbers with the 5% rule before you decide. Take the purchase price of any home you're considering. Multiply by 5%. Divide by 12. Compare that to what you'd pay to rent an equivalent place. If rent is lower, you need a compelling non-financial reason or a long horizon to make buying the better choice. If rent is higher, buying makes more mathematical sense. One more thing. The rent versus buy decision is not permanent. Renting now does not mean renting forever. Buying now does not mean you made the right call if prices fall or you need to move in 2 years. The decision should be reviewed whenever your situation changes. New city, new income, new family size, new interest rate environment. It is a calculation, not a character judgment. If this gave you a clearer way to think about it, subscribe. Every week I cover the Canadian money decisions that don't get explained clearly enough. The real numbers, no agenda. See you in the next one.